Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to write a C# program that can connect directly to a SQL Server database. Now you wouldn't want a client-side application doing this, but if you're writing the back end for a web service, this would certainly be something useful that you might want to do. So let's open up Visual Studio here, and I'm going to create a new form application. So let's scroll down and say create new project. And I'll call it like, WX link, I don't know, to SQL or something. So that's what this is called, link to SQL. That's the technology we're using. And the WX is just the abbreviation for weather. So we're going to use the weather database that we've used before. So let's click OK to create our project. And Visual Studio will kind of tick away here for a second. And there's our interface, and I'll shrink that. We don't need something nearly that big, and I'm just going to kind of leave that alone. We can come back to that and populate it later. But what we're going to do now is add the component that talks to the database. So to do that, we have to add something to our project. So let's go to our project over here in the Solution Explorer and right-click on that and see what we can add here. So let's go down to the add here, and we've got add new item. Let's see what we can add. What pops up in our options here. So let's look at ADO.NET Entity Data Model, right? That's what we want. ADO stands for Active Data Objects, and this is the component that is going to look at the database table and extract from it class wrappers that can be used to hold the data that's actually in the tables. It's going to create the entities, the wrappers for the data that's in the tables, right? And once they're in these wrappers, then we can perform link queries on them because well, they're collections. So let's give it a name down here. I'll call it like WX. This will be our model, so I'll call it weather model, WX model, and then I'll click add. And we have to pick what kind of model we want. We want EF designer from database. EF stands for entity framework, right? The entities are the things in the database. What this is going to do is it's going to design the entities for us by looking at the database. So we want entity or say EF designer from database. And let me click next. And now what we want to do is connect to our database. Now I don't actually have a SQL Server database that I can connect to. However, the process for connecting to a data file is exactly the same. The only difference is that if we were connecting to a database, we would have to supply a connection string, with the username and password. But we can connect to a database file the same way. So what I'm using here is something called an MDF file, and that's actually the data format that SQL Server uses to store its tables. So all I did was I actually ran SQL Server, created the tables, stopped SQL Server, and then just copied the data table files out of the SQL Server directory. So these are files copied directly from SQL Server directory. So let's create a new connection. And now see we have the option to connect directly to a server or connect directly to the database file. We want to connect to the database file because we don't actually have a server available. But if we did, this is what we would do. We would go choose that option instead. So let's click OK. And let's see. Now what we can do is browse out to the data source that we want to use. Sorry, I want to check one thing. Save. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Okay, let's just click New Connection. I want to pick a database file. Click Continue. And now let's go browse out to our database file. So our database file is going to be, for me, where would that be? Documents, COD. For you guys, it'll be in the downloads for the probably the week 15 folder. Week 15, what do we got in here? weather DB. That's the file you want, SQL Server Database. See, it's a SQL Server Database file. We want to connect to this file. And you can click Test Connection and just make sure that it works. And you can see here that if we were connecting to a server, this is where we would provide the username and password to connect to the server. We're just connecting to a file. We're not going through the server. So let's click OK. And now what's going to happen? Okay, so notice that this got populated for us. This is going to be the class that contains the class wrappers for our database. So the entities are the things in our database. They're the wrappers for the rows in the database tables. So let's click OK. And use a local data file that is not in the current project. Would you like to copy and or mod? Okay, so click no on this. I don't know if it matters. There we go. And I'm just going to keep clicking through. And what does this stuff do? Okay, well let's check what we want to import here. We definitely want to select our tables, and so check tables. We don't have to worry about views and stored procedures, and uncheck pluralize. So what pluralize, all that does is, like, if you have something, a class called weather, it's going to bring it in as something called weathers. It's going to try to attempt to put S's on the end of the names. So whether or not you check this, it just will slightly change the names of the entities. But I'm just going to uncheck pluralize. It's not a big deal either way. And then I'm just going to click finish. And now what's going to happen is the wizard is going to go out and it's going to look at that file and it's going to see what tables are in there, and it's going to generate the class wrappers to store the rows in those tables. So we click OK here. And it's going to think for a little bit. And running this text template can potentially harm your computer. Do not run it if you obtained it from an untrusted source. Well, I am a trusted source, so I'm going to say OK. And Entity Framework is going to spin its wheels here, and it's going to design some classes for us. I'm just going to keep clicking OK. I'm not sure why I had to click that 3 times. Okay, and notice what's happened here is we've got our table in the database was called weather data, and these were the columns in the table. There was an ID, a city, temperature, pressure, sky. All right, so these are the database fields, and we've and what Visual Studio, the wizard, has done is gone and created class wrappers for these. So let's go take a look at what actually got created. So let's scroll down through our Solution Explorer here, and you will see that we've got this thing. This is our model, right? Remember we said we wanted something called weather model. And inside of here, there should be something called the context. There it is, the weather model dot context. The context is the top level object. It's what we want to use to talk to our database. Let's expand that and see what we have here. So let's just keep expanding weather DB entities, and you can see we've got we've got something called a database set of weather data called weather data. Let's go hit F12 on this and see what's in here. And you can see that the wizard has created a class for us called weather data, and it's added public properties for each column in the table, right? So when we imported the data from XML, remember we took our file, we put it in this website, and it generated a class wrapper, and it looked a lot like this, right? So here the database wizard has generated the column information for us by looking at the database schema. Now, you may be wondering what a nullable is, a nullable of type integer. Now, let's imagine that we're pulling stuff out of a database. Well, it could have a value, or it could be null. So that's what a nullable is. It's a type that can store either a value, or it can indicate whether it doesn't have a value at all, as opposed to just, if it's like an integer, like it has to have a value. There's no way of indicating that whether or not that it has that it's been set or not. So this has got, it's like, here's the value or it's null. That's what a nullable is. And you see that in databases, because databases may not have a requirement when you insert a row that you insert a complete set of values. All right, so now so that's our weather DB entities here. That's going to be our that's our context here. Notice that it extends a database context. So let's pop over to our form and just see what we can if we can access our data here. So I'm going to go back to the form, and I don't know. Let me we got how many things? We got a ton of things in the database. So let's go to the constructor here. I'm going to open up the code, and let's just go down to our project here, and let me add a drop down list of all the cities. Let's do that. Let me go to the toolbox here. What I'm going to do is put a combo box. Right, I'll just drop the combo box right there, and I'm not going to name it cities combo box. If you were designing a real program for a real boss, I would say definitely give these controls real names. So I'm going to name this thing cities, just so we know what it is. We'll call it cities. Oops, somehow things got out of whack. Okay, so in my constructor here, what I'm going to do is populate this cities. So this is where I'm going to use a LINQ query. So now I can do a LINQ query on that context and retrieve information out of it. So let's see what that's going to look like. So I'm going to call it var. Let me pull out all the names. I'll call it city names equals. Okay, and now for my LINQ query, remember that it starts with the word from, followed by my loop variable. I'm sorry, followed by no, that's right. There's my loop variable, and then the word in, and then the collection that I want to select from. So let's see, what's the name of our collection here? Do I have W weather DB entities? Oh, well, do I have to make one of those? Hang on 1 second. Okay, I'm back in business here. Yes, the weather DB entities, that thing that represents our database tables, we have to instantiate one of those. So let's do that. Up here in the class, I'm going to make a weather DB entities, and I'll call it DB, just for database. And why don't I use make a new one of those, weather DB entities. So now that I have that collection, I can do LINQ queries on it, right? So let me do a LINQ query to pull out all the city names. So remember, the return value, or the thing that you want to store your LINQ results in, is you're going to use the word var for that, because that means let the compiler figure out the type, even though in this case we could figure out the type. It's going to be a list of strings because they're city names. So we'll call it, city names equals. And then let's put in a LINQ query here. So it's going to be from, followed by our loop counter, followed by in, followed by the collection we're selecting from. So from, I don't know, I'll select from C, I'll use C for cities, in, and then let's use our database dot, Now let's scroll down here and see what we've got. Right, our database has a list of weather data. And what's in a weather data? Well, we saw that it had all the fields that were in the database. So let's weather data dot. Do we have what do we got here? Weather data. Oh no, that's right. That's right. Sorry. This is a collection. Spacing out there. And then we want to select. What do we want to select? The name of the city. C dot city. You know, we could have called this W because it's a weather data. Maybe we'll do that. We'll call it weather data. So for every weather data object, select its city, and then let's put them in ascending order. Order by W dot city ascending. So that will create a collection of all of our city names. Now, the thing here is that remember when you execute a LINQ query, the results don't get returned to you right away. They don't get returned until you actually try to use them. Like the execution of the query is actually deferred until the result set is needed. So let's throw this collection into the combo box and see what we've got. So it was combo box 1. Now remember, combo box stores its contents in it's got a collection called items. Dot add. Can we do add range and give it a collection? City names. Dot. Okay, so this is coming back as an iQueryable of strings, right? So it's basically some sort of collection of strings. Let's try to cast this to an array and see what happens. There we go. So take the results, convert it to an array, and then add that into the combo box. So let's put a breakpoint here and run this. Initialize component, var city names. And let's see, did that work? Now let's look at our city names. Results view. It's not actually giving us the results. So let's see what came up in our combo box. Oh, look at that. So that's everything from the database. So I know that may not seem like much. However, imagine that we're writing the back end for a web service. That web service needs to supply data out of a database, right? We can use LINQ to SQL to connect to that database and retrieve whatever information that the user is asking for. So there you go. That's a simple example of how you can set up LINQ to SQL. It's very, very powerful, very useful. This seems to be like what employers are looking for people to do with C#. When the entity framework designer creates all this stuff for you, it can be a little bit baffling as to what is the actual collection that you want to perform your LINQ queries on. And it's going to be under the context. And if you expand your hierarchy, you'll find it under the context. A context in computer science speak is a way of talking to something, like a device context. It's a way of talking to a device. So you want to go find the entities that the entity framework designer created for you. So that's how that works. That's a very powerful technique, and hopefully that will get you some employment. And then again, just remember I said that a context is a way of talking to something. Notice that our WeatherDB entities inherits database context. So this thing is a way of talking to a database. Oh, and one last little bit, but that's very important. What would have happened if we had inserted something into that list? What if we'd added or deleted something out of that list? Would that change propagate back to the database? And the answer is yes. These collections that we're performing the LINQ queries on are directly tied to the database table. So any changes that we make to the LINQ will propagate to the tables, and this is a way of allowing programmers to write code to interact with a database without having to learn SQL or